Welcome to Bridgman Anatomy, Week 7. We're going to be starting the torso today, so we're going to start with the skeleton, and I'll go over the pages that I would recommend you study. Just try to get as much as you can comfortably get done of those pages. Eventually, you'll want to kind of get through them all on your own, but the confines of the class, a week is not very much time to get through all of them. So this is torso chapter in the book that I have, and for the skeleton portion, this is okay. I kind of like drawing that one. It's not the most about the skeleton, but it has a really good sort of blocky framework for the general shape and proportion of the forms. One of my favorites, this is okay over here. You might want to draw that guy. This is some of my favorite here. That's great. That's actually what I'll be doing the demo today. That was just really cool because it shows a lot of the skeleton, but then it also gets into the attachments of some of the lesser visible attachments of some of the musculature. It isolates the oblique and the latissimus, which is kind of cool. So I really like that one a lot. This is really good over here. That's a cool one. Pretty sketchy, but it's a really nice little drawing. Not a lot of skeleton for the torso. These are kind of cool. Those are kind of neat ones to do. So that's about it. So yeah, not a ton of skeleton stuff actually for the torso. So you should be able to get through most, if not all of them. So again, that's one of my favorites there. That's the one I like a lot. So I suspect probably a lot of you will be drawing that one. So that's what I'm going to go over here. So a little bit lighter week this week. Normally it's a lot to get through in a week, but for the skeleton and the torso, not a ton. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and start in on this. What I want to start with is the big overall shape of the rib cage. And it normally is tipped back slightly. Because you're going to get that sweep of the spine. All the vertebrae that are attached to the rib cage are called the thoracic vertebrae. And there's 12 of those. Then you have 5 lumbar vertebrae, and those are the vertebrae that connect the rib cage to the pelvis. So they're the base of your spine, the small of your back, whatever term you want to use. You'll usually have about a hand's width. Now we don't have a hand to judge off of, but about a hand's width between the rib cage and the pelvis in a fairly neutral position like this. And then you're going to have the pelvis, which is, from the profile, roughly the same width as the rib cage. I mean, it's nowhere near the same shape, but roughly it's the same width. So you could take a line down from the rib cage and down from the rib cage, and the pelvis will fall right in there. Again, it's going to depend a little bit on the individual. But pretty close. And then it'll be about 2/3 the height of the rib cage, or about the same height as the skull. And tipped forward slightly, although the overall form will pretty near fit in a box because you have the pubis that kind of comes out the front here. But to me, the overall form of the or of the pelvis is something like that, but then you have that pubis that kind of sticks out the front there. The acetabulum, or hip socket, sits right in there. The anterior superior iliac spine, the anterior inferior iliac spine, crest of the ilium, the posterior superior iliac spine. The posterior inferior is kind of hidden from this angle. Then come down to the sacrum and the coccyx. And he's obviously simplifying these shapes down. Then we have those lumbar vertebrae up into the thoracic vertebrae, and then the neck, which isn't really being shown in this, is the 7 cervical vertebrae. Collarbone coming down to the pit of the neck and connecting to the sternum via the manubrium. It's a little keystone shape at the top of the sternum, which is the breastbone. And we've got the overall egg shape of the rib cage, hidden underneath the oblique and the latter 2 floating ribs. But the other 10 are all connected on each side, are connected to the cartilage of the breastplate. And then in the back we have the shoulder blade with the arm raised up in this position above a 90-degree angle. That shoulder blade is going to swing forward at the bottom. Spine and scapula coming up to the acromion process. And that's the overall framework for the skeleton. Right now the rib cage feels a little bit big to me. So I'm actually going to trim that down just a little bit. There we go, that feels better. So then we've got the ribs, and on here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ribs visible. And those are the 8 ribs that connect directly to the breastbone, to that breastplate. Not actually bone, it's actually cartilage. So that's 1, 2. That's probably a little bit too much of an opening there, so 1, 2, yeah, still too much. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. And those will loop around and attach. There'd be 2 more here to make 10 that would connect to the 8th rib, and then 2 more, or I should say, yeah, 2 more that would attach to the 8th rib, and then 2 more floating ribs. But all of these would loop up to the spine. And then once you have that whole rib cage established, then you've got the serratus coming in. And the serratus attached to the upper 8 ribs. So they come from underneath the scapula. So they attach or insert onto the medial border of the scapula. If you have the scapula, if we look at it from the back, the serratus would attach underneath and along that medial border. So on the underside of the scapula, along that medial border that runs parallel to the spine. So right along here. And then from there they attach to all 8 of the ribs that are showing here. So to all 8 of those ribs. And then you've got the oblique, which attaches to the lower 8 ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those will come down and attach to each of the lower 8 ribs. So you get overlap through ribs 5, 6, 7, 8. And where those ribs overlap, that's where you get that distinctive sawtooth pattern that you see along the rib cage. It's where those muscles all interlock. And then in this instance, on top of that, you've also got the latissimus, which attaches to the underside of the arm. It inserts on the underside of the arm. And then loops around almost like a tank top. Actually, a little bit lower than that. At about the 6th or 7th vertebrae. Actually, I probably should have brought these serratus out a little bit further. Just for the sake of his drawing. I don't think they actually come out that far, but he's trying to show them coming out that they attach all through those 8 ribs. Okay, so there's the technical drawing. Little uptight. Doesn't have quite the flow to it that I would like to have, but comes the breaks sometimes. And then as we go in and start shading this in, so overall that's a decent lane, it's okay. And then from here I'm going to start again breaking down his little shorthand into something that I can understand. Here I've got a form shadow of the crest of the ilium. And then that's casting a shadow down onto the pelvis. Getting a little bit of shadow on the underside of the pelvis. Got that ridge that runs around the acetabulum, so I'm going to indicate that with a little bit of tone up here and then leave sort of a light ring around the opening of the socket. So that looks pretty good to me. Now moving up here, the oblique has the sort of full belly of the oblique, which is down here at the flank, sometimes called the love handle muscle. It's a big full ridge there. And it basically aids in side crunching or twisting the body. And then you'll get those striations or digitations that come up and attach onto the lower 8 ribs. And then the lat, which is a very large muscle that pretty much conforms to the volume of the rib cage underneath it. It's not a very thick muscle, it's just very large. And it actually twists on itself when it's drawn up, and then when it flexes, it untwists and pulls down. So it's basically it's the rowing muscle or pulling muscle. It's kind of the reverse of the pectoralis, the big chest muscle. There's the big chest muscle that sits on top of the torso that pushes forward, and it also twists on itself, and by flexing it untwists and draws the arm forward in sort of a pushing motion. That's why push-ups work the chest, whereas pull-ups and bent over rows and things like that, any kind of pulling motion works the latissimus. Even on these digitations, I'm going to put a slightly harder edge underneath and slightly softer edge on top because I just know that's how form works. I don't really see that on his drawings, but I just know that's how form works. If that light is coming from above, you have a soft edge on top of the shadow, hard edge on the bottom. So I'm shading the individual ribs, but then I'm also thinking about the overall volume of the rib cage and imagining if it was a solid unit, there would be also a big shadow shading the whole thing like a sphere. Okay, so something like that. Again, just looking at those big simple forms and trying to interpret his drawings into a tonal representation as much as I possibly can. Again, the thing I really like about this particular piece is that it shows those simple forms of the, or rather more intermediate forms of the pelvis and the rib cage and the shoulder blade and even the upper arm, and then it shows these attachments of some of those more obscure. The muscles themselves aren't obscure. You can see the serratus, you can see the oblique, you can see the latissimus, but where they attach sometimes isn't super clear on the model. So that's one reason why I really like that one. So it's a pretty cool little drawing. So we're going to go ahead and call that it for this week. Go over those pages that I showed you in the book. Focus on the skeleton of the rib cage. Really, any skeleton of the torso that you can find is totally fine. But I pointed out the ones that I think are kind of the best. And then next week we'll be moving into the musculature of the torso, and then the muscular model, and then the last week we'll be drawing from memory and or invention. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got something out of it, and I look forward to seeing your submissions.